Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful week. And joining me today for this special episode, I always say all the episodes are special, but this one more particularly because Micah is going to be kind of interviewing me because I got to preach. I guess I would say I got to preach at big church or big people service. This past Sunday, which was the first time in a long time that I was able to do that. So, so we're going to kind of dive into that, and hopefully that can be motivation for any of you who are listening, who maybe you were in ministry and you're gone for a while due to whatever reasons there may be, and now you're back and you're about to preach your first sermon, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I feel nervous, or I don't know what I'm doing, or is it any good? If what I'm saying impactful or anything else, all the thoughts that go through a pastor's head. We're going to talk about it all on today's episode. So Micah, first of all, how was your week?
Good. Well, I was thinking about it because we have a baby, and she'll be 6 weeks old this week, and I have 2 more weeks of leave, and everybody keeps asking us, how are things going? And things are going great, but it's like I don't know what day it is. I have a hard time keeping track of the day and the week and XYZ. So looking forward to going back to work and kind of just getting into a routine again of what knowing what day it is. Not that this time home hasn't been rewarding and fulfilling and all those things, but yeah, I'm just don't know what day it is. And it's just I think for the first time in my adult life, like this is the longest that I've ever been off from a job. And so I got 2 months off and my wife got 3. And so it's been interesting, but it's amazing how a little human like a baby can keep you moving, because they always need something, whether it's a bottle or a diaper or clothes or held or burped or Scott, the drill. You have 2 kids.
Yes. So yeah, and it's I didn't have the luxury of having maternity leave when Laura had her 2 kids. So, but I can understand like just having a place where you're just like just sitting around, and I wouldn't necessarily sitting around where you don't have like you're doing your regular job. I know when I left, when I resigned, and I was kind of in that in between stage of finding what's next and trying to find just a regular job to work. I mean, there'd be times where it's like, okay, I don't even know what day it is today. Like it's because they just all blur, because it seems like every day is the same. It's not like I have a routine. It's not like, okay, it's Monday, Tuesday, I have these meetings, Wednesday, I have this. It's just like every day is just kind of like vacation in some ways, where it's like, I'm going to do this routine, but it's all kind of blending in together because there's no versatility in what I'm doing. I don't look forward to Fridays to go out and hang out and have a day off work because, well, I'm not working. So, I mean, if I want to go see a movie on Monday afternoon, I can do that because I'm not working. So, so I think that's definitely good. And yeah, and it's also refreshing too, but you do get a little stir crazy. Like I need to get back into a routine. I really need to do something. Absolutely. So, my week was just pretty uneventful. My dad actually came down over the weekend because he was taking some furniture because their church is this big youth rummage sale. So so anytime we have left any stuff, we just, if they're down, we'll do it then. But we had to move like a brand new big like china cabinet that our financial manager at the church had, and she didn't want. So we went down there, we moved it out of her house, put it in our house, did all that. And then we had a dead tree in our backyard. So my dad brought his chainsaw and we chopped down a tree. So that was my weekend, moving furniture and playing Paul Bunyan. So I guess I was Babe the Blue Ox. My dad, after a while, was like, I can't hardly move. Like, because the chainsaw really shook him. So I had to like help carry my dad everywhere. So he was Paul Bunyan. I was Babe the Blue Ox. Oh goodness. So as we
there's something to be said about manual labor.
oh
Like
yeah.
people like really people that can do that stuff day in and day out, but they don't get enough credit.
Oh no, and especially the toll it takes on their bodies like after a while. Like when you see I mean, I know a lot of people love it and they love to mow, they love the landscape, they love to chop trees down. But over time, eventually you get to a point where you hit a certain age and you're like, I can't do this because my body's just sore. And it's not like I can recover quick enough than I used to when I was doing it in my 20s. So, yeah. Um so as we before we dive into our topic, stories gone wild. Micah, do you have a story? Anything wild happen?
Not that I can think of.
Uh
I
yeah,
was
it's been
thinking
a
about. Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking like me, like nothing really wild has happened recently. Like a lot of times I'm pulling stories from the bag, and now my bag's getting a little light because it's like no, nothing crazy's been going on.
Well, I was thinking the same thing about the bag of stories being kind of light, but I had mentioned in last week's episode. What was our topic specifically? It was about
It was about youth and how to engage
all
youth
social
with
media.
social media.
Yeah, yeah. So I remember I was at a church at the time as the worship leader, and I had resigned, and I had shared on last week's episode that my Facebook account had got hacked and posted some pretty inappropriate stuff, and I had no control over it because somebody hacked it. What I didn't share was, and I remembered this later on, was that the chairman of the board called me that afternoon and said to me that he wasn't sure that I should even come to my last Sunday because he was so appalled by what had happened on my Facebook. And so, even though I had no control over it, even though I had somebody had hacked my page, I changed the password, I took it down. Um, it was just kind of validation that I should move on because it was just they weren't very supportive of the fact that like it wasn't my fault, but yeah. So anyway,
Yeah, and that's interesting too because you know I've had some people. Well, I can even think about when before I went to Virginia. Um, the person who was the interim pastor was preaching a sermon, and he drove 2 hours to go preach every Sunday at that church, and then would go back. So one time he was doing whatever and then he pulls up a quote, and I guess he didn't read the quote carefully because in the quote you can clearly see that there was a swear word in the quote, and people started gasping in the church because of it. So and he kind of looks up, he noticed the gas, he looked up and go, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize there was," and he apologized, said, "I didn't realize there was a inappropriate word there." So they moved on to the next slide real quick, and he just kind of talked a little bit about the quote and finished it up. Instantaneous apology. "Oh, sorry, must have not read it. I do apologize." And there were people in that congregation that were really like upset and were like, "Ooh, baby, we should get a new interim," and blah, like, and it's like, no, like it was a mistake. It wasn't like he was doing something on purpose. Like, but yeah, I think I think sometimes when situations happen, you have to have some type of grace and mercy and not just kind of be rageful all the time, I guess. And really thinking that people are doing things just to, especially if you see a pattern, like if your Facebook page has mostly been very kosher and then all of a sudden one thing comes up, then for me, I'd be like, okay, something's amiss here because this is not very typical of what Micah typically puts on his Facebook page.
well, and it goes back to the whole conversation of power hungry stuff, like people being power hungry within elder boards and um, being possessive, I think is the right word for it, of the church and the team that they serve on, and the thought that they control everything when in reality they don't. It's not really their church. So uh, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, interesting. So I think yeah, like and you're right, like people just get so, even people who whatever little power they have, even if it is on a church bar, that a church board, they can really, you know, really abuse that power and take it to a degree that doesn't really need to be taken to. Um, yeah. Uh, I guess for my stories gone wild, that's the thing. Like nothing's wild has really happened. But I do think that I was watching the Olympics, and it was funny. I was watching the opening ceremonies, and it's interesting because anytime when I watch, and I missed the first half of it because I was like laying down, uh, but I got to see the last half of it. But my wife missed it, so we ended up watching the whole thing again, the whole opening ceremonies, and I'm laughing the whole entire time because I'm sitting here watching these opening ceremonies, and the one thing I liked about it is in Olympics past, you'd always have like the parade of athletes or the lighting of the torch and the parade of athletes, and then the opening ceremonies happen second. And this time it looks like they intermingled everything. So you're watching a few countries come in, and then here's like a little musical act. A few things come in. So I felt like you didn't get bored watching it. Like I felt like it caught my attention. Like, oh, here's this parade and here's this. But my goodness, you want to talk about what a wild opening Olympics. Like I never thought I would see a decapitated Marie Antoinette and then French metal band Kajora play the opening of the Olympics. And then there's that guy running around on the rooftops like the faceless man. And every time I kept seeing that, I'm like, is that supposed to be Assassin's Creed? Like, what is this? And then you had Lady Gaga sing, which I'm like, oh, why is Lady Gaga here? She's not French. But she's singing a French song. And it was just stuff like that. You keep seeing it and you go, oh, this is very interesting because there's just a lot of stuff to digest. And, you know, and I think, I think for me, it's going to be probably a more memorable opening Olympics than Olympics past, just because of the way it was done, the way it was directed, and kind of all the different moving piece and parts that kind of gave opening to just France and French culture in general. The thing that really threw me for a loop was when the Minions showed up and you saw that they stole the Mona Lisa, and I'm thinking, what does Minions have to do with French? Are they speaking French this whole entire time? I didn't realize, but then I found out that Illumination Studios headquarters are in France. I'm like, oh, that's the French connection. But it was just a wild opening Olympics.
I didn't even watch it, but I heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a chance, you might want to watch some of this stuff because it's there's times where I'm like, oh, that's neat, and there's times where I'm just like, oh my gosh, what the heck is this? And apparently, I guess they're still, I don't know what events they're trying to have the athletes swim in the river, but apparently the river's still contaminated. So I don't know if anybody's going to be doing any Olympic Games swimming in that river because it's just so gross. Oh boy, oh boy. But yep, that's our story's gone wild. So today, I just told Micah before the start of the show, as we're trying to figure out what topics, because we have a list of topics we discuss, and some we like, others, and some we're like, maybe today's not the day to talk about that. But one of the things I mentioned to him is I preached last Sunday. Then he goes, well, let's talk about that because it's been a while since you preached. So let's talk about that. So yeah, I don't know where we want to start with this, Mike.
Well, I guess kind of, I mean, for the people that have listened to the show for a long time, they know that you and I have both been in ministry for a while, but we've also been through some transitions and um, your previous church, your previous role, you were the lead pastor and you were on a preaching rotation every Sunday. Um, except for, maybe special occasions, PPS, Sunday, whatever. I don't know how that church did things. Um, but in most cases, when you're the lead pastor, you're preaching, I don't know, 48, 50 Sundays a year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe get 2 weeks off. So, in the transition that Scott made from being a lead pastor, he is now the family life pastor at a church in Columbus, where he kind of oversees youth and children's ministry together. And so he's not on a regular preaching rotation. And so he told me that, hey, I got to preach last Sunday, but it was nice because my senior pastor was there and she was able to give me the feedback, and I wasn't always able to get feedback in other spaces because, hey, I'm the only guy, the only preacher, the only pastor,
Mm-hmm.
especially in smaller churches where it's literally like you're it, right? So you could the church could like you, but you could honestly never get any feedback in respect to, like, you know, for those who have done any sort of public speaking or preaching, you have to do your research, right? It's like you're writing a book every week, a short story of your and Scott and I both been in the seminary, um, your exegetical, which is just a fancy word for exposition and really digging deep into the commentary, into the scriptures of what is going on in reference to what you're teaching about. Let's just say the Lord's Supper, for example, or the Sermon on the Mount, and you wanted to go to Matthew 5, 6, 7, and really just dive into those passages so you get commentaries and you do your research and you
Mm-hmm.
write and you study and you make sure that you know what you're talking about before you get up there and really share your heart or what God's placed on your heart to share. um so Scott mentioned that he preached last week at his church. Have you preached before there?
I think I preached one time last year when the pastor was gone
But
because
she's
she
not
went
been
on,
there.
but, and I think even then, like, and that's the thing, like, it's not just I'm preaching two culturally different services, a contemporary service and a more traditional service. And just even the flow of the service is
Is
completely
different.
different from both of them. So, especially like how we do prayers to everything else is completely
But she
different.
wasn't there the first time you preached.
No,
This
she
time
wasn't
she
there.
was
So this
there.
was, so I think this is the first time she, unless you like saw like the previous video from last year and just heard me, like this was the first time she got to hear me actually preach and be there in person. So yeah.
I
So
guess how
yeah,
did it
that,
go? I mean, like,
oh geez.
were you comfortable with it? Were you like,
Oh
and just to
yeah.
give context too, like Scott and I have background in the Church of God. We're ordained through the Church of God, but the church he's at now is the United Methodist Church, which there's not a lot of differences theologically between the two.
Yeah, we're all
But
from the
Scott,
Wesleyan tree.
yeah, but like Scott mentioned, however, he has a traditional service and a contemporary service, and um, for those who don't know, like, they're in the traditional, UMC churches or Presbyterian churches, Catholic even. There's a lot of liturgy and there's prayers and there's just a certain structure as to the way they do things. And so Scott and I, well, we've attended churches like that and attended services like that, doesn't mean that we're necessarily used to the ebb and flow of that more traditional
Yeah.
liturgical service. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'd say so, because there was a couple times where it's like I don't know what to do here. Like, or it was one of the things like who's doing this, who's doing that, and occasionally like the pastor will look at me and I look at her like, what am I supposed to do? like a deer in the headlights, like, you want me to who's do because we never, I mean, we knew I was preaching and we knew that, I was gonna like read this liturgy at the beginning of service, especially for our contemporary service. But then everything else in between, like I had no clue if I was doing it or not. Because again, like my name's not, because a lot of times if you look at the bulletin, you can see like your name like on the side. So you kind of know like, hey, here's what we're going to do. Here's kind of what we're attempting. And we don't necessarily see my name on those things. So I'm thinking like, okay, I may not be doing those, but maybe I am. I don't know. So finally, like, especially at the end, it's like, am I giving the benediction? And Colleen just says, yeah, go give the benediction. I'm like, okay. So, and that's the thing, like the benediction, I was used to, for me, for the benediction, I was always used to, all right, let's close out our service in prayer. And I would bow my head and we all pray, and I pray everyone out. And I say, God bless, go in his peace. But what they do in the United Methodist Church, they just say, may God give you the peace and the understanding, and may you experience his love, that you may go forth into your communities and do good. Amen. And that's it. So you're not really, you're not really closing your eyes or leading people in prayer. You're just kind of making like a final benediction, like Moses would do, like, may the Lord bless you and keep you, like that sort of thing. I'm like, oh, that's different. Like, I'm not used to that. And how do I know what to say? Is that something like in a liturgical book that they have this little thing, or you just kind of make it up by your own? So I just kind of, since I wasn't prepared, I just kind of said whatever rambled in my head and just messed up because I wasn't prepared, because I didn't know I was doing it. But then by the time we got to the second service, like, okay, I'm going to be doing the benediction, so I can at least have something coherent to say when I dismiss everybody. And then even like that, like after the end of the contemporary service, once the benediction's done, that's it. Everybody gets up, everybody leaves. But in the traditional service, you do it, and then there's like a whole postlude that's played. The pastors leave, and then once the postlude's done playing, then everybody else in the congregation gets up and leaves too.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different thing that I'm not used to as well. Like, oh, why is everyone still sitting in here? Why am First time that happened, I got up, I start leaving the door, and I'm like, where is everybody? And I'm like looking around, like, what happened to everybody? And I'm like, are they still in there? So then I kind of opened up the door, and people are still sitting there. So I walked in and sat back down. Because I didn't know what the heck was.
It's like putting a Catholic priest at Elevation Church.
Yeah, no joke.
So
Yeah.
in respect to your sermon, how did you feel between the two services, and what kind of feedback did Colin give you?
So actually it was interesting because so kind of as far as prep, like Colleen knew that over the summer we're going to be teaching on the parables. So there's me, there's her, that we have like another like it's kind of like our outreach pastor who does a lot more with like adult education, or really does a lot more with older adults. And he's an ordained minister too. So, she said, hey, you can preach too. So it's like, okay, so we've been kind of going off. So I was preaching once this month and once next month in August. And since we're doing the parables, she came and she asked me, okay, pick two parables that you like to preach on. So I said, I like to preach on the Good Samaritan, and I like to preach on the Pearl of Great Price. And immediately Pastor Colin goes, the Pearl of Great Price is my favorite parable. And I'm thinking, I better not screw this up. And so when I looked at the schedule, once you finally got the schedule made, the very first sermon I'm preaching is the Pearl of Great Price, because it's the one Sunday she's actually going to be there, because the next Sunday she won't be there. So I'll be taking over. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I better not screw this up. So, and it's also kind of interesting too, because like for me, once I get a task, I want to try to do it as quickly as possible and get some type of foundation laid. So then I can take time to really build and put everything together and then polish everything so that when it's presented, it's good. So it's funny because then after she gave that to me, next week we had our staff meeting and we're talking about that, and I made the comment like, yeah, I already have that sermon written already, because I did. And Colleen was just like, oh wow, look at you. Because she's usually like, but I mean, typically she's usually probably waiting, with her doing all her jobs of trying to minister to people and have meetings and deal with, all this other stuff. Like usually by the time she starts getting ready to work on her sermon, it's usually towards the end of the week. at the same time, the UMC has a liturgical calendar. So really, you just open up the liturgy and you can say, okay, here's the verse that I'm preaching on. Okay. And then you just go from there and you do your homework and you do your research. So, and plus, Colleen's in her 60s. So she's been doing this for a long time. So,
Sure.
so she probably has like a rhythm and she knows exactly, here's my style, here's my rhythm. So she could probably easily do a sermon Saturday evening, present it on Sunday, and it'd still be great because she just knows what she's doing. So in some ways it was good because I felt like I could really explore more. Plus, some of the challenges I had preaching was we changed our presentation software. And we're trying to work through this new presentation software now and see how it works. And then with this new presentation software, since it's app-based, it's web-based, like I can control the entire service through my phone or through my tablet. So, which was nice because not only can I control the slides when I need to show them, but also I could put notes in there. So all my notes are in there. So I don't have to worry about having two things. It's all in one thing. So that was very nice. The problem is since anybody else can access it, and as far as staff and like add stuff, like our worship leader can add his music in there, our secretary can add the slides, so everybody's built up. So it's not just one person trying to build the entire service. You have multiple people doing it, and then our secretary would go and kind of arrange them in a correct order. And there's a part of me that goes, oh, I hope my notes don't get erased. Because if my notes disappear, I'm screwed because then I don't have any notes. Because instead of me writing them in Word and then just copy and pasting them, I just wrote it right in the app, which I probably knew I shouldn't have done that in case something went bad. So next time I'm just going to write it first. So then in case if anything goes bad, I can just pull it up and go, here it is. But so we had that. And ultimately this day, kind of like the week before, I think there's a couple times I just went, it just ran through it, talked through it over and over again. And there's a couple times where there was one point where I had 3 parts. I'm like, this third part doesn't really make sense. It's kind of odd. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. And then actually, and I think that's kind of the good thing about having time where most pastors don't, is that I could go through it a couple times throughout, the next couple of weeks and realize, this doesn't fit. I'm going to go ahead and just remove it, or I'm going to really take a big chunk of this part out of the sermon. And the few parts I've left, I'm really going to tailor it to make it flow. And then that helped me change my opener too. And it flowed pretty good. And for the most part, I think I was okay. I know the first service, since it's more casual, I like to pace and walk around a bit. So I think I felt myself, I was pacing a lot more than standing still. Traditional service, because you have like those big, gigantic wooden curved pulpits, you can't really move around. So there'd be times I'd be staying up there. Then when there's times where I'd be given an illustration, I would step down and kind of talk on stage, and then I'd go back up into the booth and talk. Because if I stay there, then I'm just not looking at the audience, at the congregation. I'm just staring here with the death grip claw onto the pulpit. I'm just trying to ground myself. So yeah, so I think for the most part, everything went well. As far as the pastor giving me notes, like after the 9:00 service, I didn't get any feedback at all because she was talking about needless to say, there's people who are talking to me because VBS is next week. So they're asking me questions about VBS. Some people are asking me about our Labor Day youth retreat and trying to get chaperones. So I was just having people bombard me, asking me about church stuff. And then occasionally people go, oh, that was great. Good job. But the 11:00 service, that's when Colleen really kind of said, hey, you did a fantastic job. This was great. You did wonderful. And now I just want you to, and I hope you get enough rest today. And I said, oh, I'm not resting today. I have too many projects I have to do at home, so I'm not resting at all, which by the time Sunday evening rolled around, I was ready to go to bed at like 6. I was so exhausted. But needless to say, I mean, all I got was really good feedback. I got a lot of, there are certain things I didn't know before. I had some people come up to me and said, "Oh, this is so timely because my family's really going through the situation." And even that's why my daughter is here from Texas, because she's just going through a rough thing. And this sermon was exactly what she needed to hear. So, when you hear comments like that, it's like, oh, wow, good. I'm glad that this happened. I'm glad I was able to speak. And not only that, I was glad I was able to have enough time to really make something good so that people could really respond to it in a very powerful way.
How is it different compared to what you were used to in, other situations, other churches, other speaking engagements?
Oh, so I think, yeah, well, first I'm doing 2 services, so that was completely different. And I think even the other thing that's different just with the service in general, like the songs that were chosen, I think that's kind of the interesting thing. The songs that were chosen, you had the contemporary service had certain things that kind of fit with the message, even though I don't think they really realize how much it fit. Because even our worship leader, when he goes up there to do the last song, he goes, "Wow, this last song really fits with Scott's message. We didn't plan this, so here we go." And then even in the traditional service, where there's a lot of hymns, a lot of them kind of even flowed with it as well. So I think that was kind of cool too, just seeing more of your modern music and some of your more traditional music, how they all kind of connected to the same thing. As far as reactions, I think, as far as reactions go, the traditional service, and I think it might be cultural. I feel like the traditional service has a culture where after a minister is done preaching, they will go and they will kind of say, "Hey, this is great. Good job." Where the contemporary service, you had a few people, but not many people going and saying, "Hey, that was great. That was meaningful. That really impacted me." Everyone gets up, they talk business or they talk with other people in the church, and then they go home. So not a lot of like feedback. I mean, all feedback I got was positive, but didn't get a lot of feedback from service. As far as presenting the sermon, I feel like by the time I got to the traditional service, which is our second service, that I was confident enough to really flow a little bit better. I noticed I wasn't doing a lot of or I felt like my mind was kind of more focused on what things connected when. And there's even some stuff I didn't say in the first service that I said in the second service because it just kind of flowed that way. And I think a lot of it is flowed because I wasn't too focused on my nervousness or am I saying something or people is anything I'm saying making sense, kind of that sort of thing. So I think kind of the benefit of having multiple services in some way is your first service you do is kind of your testing ground. And if you get and when you start getting a few people say, "Hey, that was really great. That was wonderful." Then you kind of go into your second service with confidence. Where before, being pastor of one service, you preach and you hear people go, "This is great. This is not great." And from there, you don't really know if it was even great at all. If you have the people who are kind of naysayers and people who are positive, you only got that one base of people who are giving you feedback. And from that one base, if it's a mixed bag, you're kind of like, okay, well, was it good? Was it impactful? Did I just waste all my time really working hard on this message just so nothing happens? People don't feel something, or people don't feel empowered or encouraged,
people don't
or
react,
or people don't react. And a lot of times that could just be, people's things. They just go there, they listen to the message, they leave, and they don't say anything. And then the people who do say something, they have some type of reaction, but sometimes the negative reactions, you don't really know, okay, well, what is it? Because it definitely didn't fit what they're complaining about really does not fit with what I was trying to communicate. So did I not clearly communicate this point pretty well, or are they more upset about something else and they're just bringing it during kind of tying their frustration of something else that happened with my message that morning, so I think that was the difference. I think the other difference too is just the time. I had a lot of time to really prep and boil this down, and I think even now, like the one I at the end of July, or I'm sorry, the end of August, I'm preaching again, but I already have like a really good foundation, and I already have like my points already kind of planned already. It's now just trying to work on the flow and the rhythm of it. So I think now when I go in to do that, that's going to kind of be the next thing that I have to get that to work, and we'll kind of go from there. So yeah, I think that's kind of was the difference from the last places I've worked at, is that, I had more time. And even though I would get my sermon, I go into work Monday, and already start getting my sermon done on Monday. And then the rest of the day I would polish it. Having month to polish your sermon can really do it good. And I think that's kind of where I'm lucky to just be able to do that well and be able to present something well. And I think especially it was good too, because now I feel like I'm kind of getting back into that confidence with my sermon presentation, just writing it, preparing it, presenting it. I think I'm kind of getting more confident in that as well, just so that, if something happens where Colleen Six says, hey, I can't come in today, I'm like throwing up, I need you to preach. I need you to throw a Hail Mary. You need to preach something. I feel like I would have the tools and the confidence to say, okay, here's what I can preach on, and I can go from there.
Yeah. I don't know, kind of last question. I mean, I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but like kind of the last question that I have is that how do you feel overall, having preached in two different, kind of settings? I know you've preached in other places like camps and, special occasions, etc., whether it's a funeral or whatever. But like speaking in the Church of God world, for example, and then now in the UMC church, how do you feel equipped, prepared? Like going back, let's say a random Church of God calls you next week just to come and fill in somewhere. Do you feel more prepared after preaching at a UMC church, and vice versa after spending so many years as a lead pastor?
I think that's a great question, because I think if there's a church like the Church of God and has like a very similar flow of service or order of service like most Church of God churches have, I would definitely feel confident jumping in, preaching, and I am pretty confident I'll do a great job. I think if it was the opposite, if I was coming from a Church of God thing and I was called by a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian church or a UMC church saying, hey, can you fill in? And I go in, and let's just say they don't have a liturgist to kind of do all the liturgy stuff, and I have to do it all, I would be like, okay, I don't know what the heck I'm doing with this liturgy stuff. I think over time I kind of know a little bit now, just because I've been, working here and I've seen how things flow. I see how the liturgy's moved in a contemporary service in the UMC and how liturgy moves in a traditional service in the UMC. So I'm kind of very open to knowing like, hey, I can really do a good job with this. But yeah, so I think overall, I think I'm pretty confident if I was to get that call and saying, hey, can you fill in? I would probably be able to do that pretty confidently. And I think even now, going from a UMC church to, if a Lutheran church called me and said, hey, can you fill in? I probably would feel pretty confident in that as well. I just would know, like, when I get there on Sunday morning, to get there a little bit early and kind of go through, okay, what, do you guys do? Are you guys doing communion today? Where's your liturgy books on communion? So then that way, when I go in, I'm doing kind of, we're creatures of habit to a fault. So even if I went in, I did communion, I didn't do it exactly the way the Lutherans do their liturgy on communion, that will mess people up. So, for me, and this is just me personally, I want to try to make sure that even though I'm coming in and filling in, I want to make sure that A, I'm doing a good job, but B, I want to make sure that I am trying to give a quality of service that's very familiar to that particular congregation to the best of my ability. It's not going to be perfect, and I know it's not going to be perfect, but if I can at least put in the effort, people will see, okay, this person from this UMC church came in, or this Church of God church also came in to try to do this service, and yet they were mindful enough to try to attempt to do a good liturgy for us. So I think that's kind of a big thing too.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about your experience? And you obviously sound like, I mean, I guess for the listeners, I mean, to put, I guess to put it in a layman's terms, like you've been preaching for years, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but this is, I think before we hit record, you had said something about like, man, I've got to preach in all these different spaces. However, I've not had a pastor or another pastor sitting in the audience to give me the feedback that I need, or
Yeah.
the feedback that I, want. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in respect to like how am I doing with this preaching? How am I doing with this teaching?
Yeah.
How's my public speaking going? Um, and uh, what would you say to those who are getting into preaching and teaching in respect to getting feedback?
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. Like, I know not everybody, and again, we live in a different time now.
Sure.
So the fact that I can, if I was going back and I was pastoring a church that I was the main person, and I'm the main person, and I have no other pastors to. I mean, if you have some like your home pastor, your home church pastor, or if you know of any other colleagues in ministry that are also preaching too, you can easily say, hey, can you view this sermon? Let me know what you think. Let me know kind of what I said or whatnot. And then you could get feedback from there too. And not only that, the nice thing, if you have video feedback, that's better because people can kind of look at your body posture and your language.
Well, you can also watch yourself and just see what you've done. And I know that people
Yeah,
hate listening to themselves, but like it's a great tool.
it is. And you can kind of see yourself too and kind of go from there. Yeah. So I think that's pretty good as well. But yeah, I think that's a great way to get feedback. But if you're in a position where you may have other staff or other pastors around you and you're preaching, and they're not, and you're not preaching because you're filling in because the pastor's leaving on vacation, but if they're planning on being there and they're just giving you the opportunity, that's kind of the way to go, to just kind of get feedback, see how things are going, and then kind of move from there. Because, I think in some ways that's going to be good for them. Plus, you're going to know if you're good or not, because if they don't ask you to preach again, man, I really screwed this up. Like, I really did something wrong. But, always, and I think the other thing too is, and I think this is especially with younger people, and I think especially with older people at pastors as well. I think there's kind of a chasm between those two generations. But, always make sure that you don't interpret advice for criticism. Because even if they're like, hey, you did great here, this is the things that you might want to work on, then yeah, you might want to don't kind of be like, oh, well, yeah, but the commentary you looked at was Matthew Henry, which is outdated. I'm looking at the newer sources of commentary. People
Yeah.
can kind of have a certain like air about them, about preaching. Because again, I think preaching is like, it's something you're creating, right? When you're preaching a sermon, it's something you're creating. It's like an art project. So when you bring your art project and want to say, hey, here's this cool thing I created, and everyone's like, it sucks, like, you're going to take offense to it because like you worked hard on this thing, and you don't want people being hurting your project. At the same time, if there's people who can say, hey, here's how we can make this project better, then you might want to listen to those people, because then they're going to kind of help you out in a very powerful way. So that's all the so I think that's kind of what I would say to advice for those is just, if you have the luxury, if you don't have the luxury, find people to do your sermon, especially if you're recording. And if you're not recording your sermons, you might want to, just because, we're living in 2024. And also it's a good tool to just kind of check yourself and see, okay, what things can I do, or what things can I improve on?
Yeah, I remember when I was in seminary at Anderson, I took my preaching class with Dr. Sebastian, and the difficult thing for us was that, so we had to write 6 sermons, but he gave us all the passages that we had to write. So we had to write 6 sermons, and then we had to preach 2 of the sermons and video 2 of them. And then that was like our final projects, was like videoing our sermons. And then he made us critique it, and then he critiqued it. And so, but I think the tough piece in that was like, he gave us the passage that we had to preach. And so it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm going to pick Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Like, it wasn't like, he intentionally gave us, sermons that he wanted us to write manuscripts about. So, I think it's imperative to watch yourself and video yourself. And like you said, Scott, it's 2024, and we have all the ability and technology in the world to not be able to see ourselves or play it back or listen to ourselves. So I often listen to our podcast just because I'm like, man, what did I say? Did I say something silly, or did I, what can I do to be better? And how is my enunciation with things? And, even with Nerd Talk with Jordan Halstead, the other podcast that I'm on, I'm like, I edit and produce those episodes every week. And it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't have said it like that, or maybe I should have been more clear. It's just it's a great learning tool. So do you have any other thoughts about your preaching experience at your church as we wrap it up?
No, I think for the most part, I think that kind of says everything. And I guess if you want to listen to it, and you could just go to it's on YouTube, or I think it's also on Facebook too, but you can just find Bexley United Methodist Church, both on YouTube or Facebook. And you can just click on either the traditional or the Sunburst service, and you can watch it for July 28th is the day I preach. So there you go.
I know what I'm watching this morning.
Batman the Animated Series.
No, I was talking about your sermon.
Oh.
All right, Scott.
Oh my gosh.
Well, take it away and wrap us up.
All right, friends. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hopefully it was useful to you. But if you do like this episode, feel free to share it with your friends so that they too can get the enjoyment that you get from listening to this podcast. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back on next week with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. The Scott Stedman podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you so much for listening.